Tonight's story was sent to me by someone who asked to remain anonymous. As always, names and locations have been changed. Whether you believe what happened is entirely up to you. I've been a land surveyor for a little over 11 years. It's not the sort of job people ask about at barbecues, and if we're doing it properly, most people never even notice we're there. Our job is simple. Find old property boundaries. Check survey markers. Make sure the maps still match the land beneath your feet. After enough years, you stop second-guessing your equipment. GPS can fail. Batteries die. People make mistakes. But if you take your time and check everything twice, the numbers always lead you back to the truth. At least, that's what I believed. A couple of years ago, my company won a contract in the Appalachian Mountains. A timber company had bought several adjoining parcels of forest and wanted every property boundary verified before they started logging. Most of the original survey markers had been placed almost a century earlier, so our job was to locate each one and compare it against the old records. It sounded like one of the easiest jobs we'd had all year. I was paired with a surveyor named Mark. Mark had been doing the job for decades. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. The kind of bloke who never spoke unless he had something worth saying. If Mark offered an opinion, people usually listened. The only strange thing happened before we even left the office. He unfolded the survey map, studied one section for a few seconds, then quietly folded it shut again. I asked if he'd worked that area before. Years ago, he said. That was all. The drive took most of the morning. Once we left the highway, the roads narrowed quickly. Bitumen turned to gravel. Gravel turned to dirt. Before long, we were following an old forestry track that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. By the time we parked the truck, there wasn't another vehicle anywhere in sight. No phone reception, no traffic. Just ridge after ridge of dense forest. We checked the weather, loaded our gear, and started walking. The first survey marker was exactly where it was supposed to be. A weathered granite monument, half buried beneath moss and leaves. I brushed the top clean, confirmed the survey mark, logged the coordinates, and moved on. The second marker matched perfectly. So did the third. By early afternoon, we'd settled into the usual rhythm. Walk. Measure. Record. Repeat. Then we reached the fourth marker. I set up the total station while Mark uncovered the monument. The instrument finished calculating. 417.3 meters. I checked the original field notes. The recorded distance was 423.1. Almost 6 meters out. I frowned. That wasn't impossible. Old surveys drift occasionally. I reset the instrument and measured again. The reading barely changed. I checked the level. Ran the measurement a third time. Still the same. That's strange, I said. Mark looked through the instrument himself, then compared the reading with the original survey. He didn't seem surprised. Wouldn't be the first old survey to be a little off. It was a reasonable explanation. At least, it sounded like one. So we logged the discrepancy and kept walking. 20 minutes later, the next marker was wrong too. Different distance. Different direction. That's when I stopped thinking it was a surveying error. I looked over at Mark. He wasn't looking at the equipment anymore. He was staring into the trees. "Everything all right?" I asked. He didn't answer straight away. Instead, he folded the survey notes, slipped them back into his backpack, and looked further into the forest. "We've done enough for today." I checked my watch. "It's not even 4. I know." "Then why are we stopping?" Mark didn't look at me. He kept staring into the trees. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "Those lines don't always stay where you leave them." I waited for him to explain what he meant. He didn't. He just adjusted the strap on his backpack and started walking back the way we'd come. I stood there for a second, looking between him and the survey marker. "Mark," he stopped. "What did you mean? Those lines don't stay where you leave them?" He looked back at me. "I mean exactly what I said. That's not an answer." He sighed. "No." "It isn't." The walk back to the truck was quiet. Not awkward. Just quiet. Every now and then I'd catch Mark looking over his shoulder. Never for long, but often enough that I started doing it too. I never saw anything. Back at the truck, we packed away the equipment and drove into the nearest town. Over dinner, I tried bringing it up again. Those measurements today. Have you seen that before? Mark took a sip of his coffee before answering. I've seen plenty of bad surveys. That's not what I'm asking. He looked out the diner window for a moment. No. Then what's going on? I don't know. It was the first answer he'd given all day that sounded completely honest. The next morning, we headed back up the mountain. I expected Mark to be just as reluctant as he'd been the afternoon before. Instead, he seemed determined, almost impatient. We reached the fourth marker just after 10, the one that had been almost 6 meters out. I set up the total station, checked the level, took the measurement, 423.1, exactly what the original survey recorded. I stared at the display. That wasn't possible. I checked it again, same result. Mark, he didn't say anything. He was already writing in his notebook. Yesterday, this was 6 meters out. I know. Now it's right. I know. I walked back to the previous marker. Reset the instrument. Measured the line again. Still perfect. Every reading matched the original survey. Every one. It was as though yesterday had never happened. I looked at my notebook. The numbers I'd written the day before were still there. 417.3. I'd written them myself. I'd checked them 3 times. Now the land was telling me a different story. I looked up at Mark. He closed his notebook. We're not finished. What do you mean? He pointed further up the ridge. There's 1 marker left. I checked the map. He was right. 1 final boundary monument. It sat almost a kilometer beyond the surveyed property, tucked inside a section of forest neither of us had any reason to enter. I frowned. Why would they place one all the way out there? Mark didn't answer. He just started walking. After a few seconds, I followed. The climb became steeper the further we went. Before long, there wasn't any sign of an old trail. Just rocks, fallen timber, and thick undergrowth that forced us to slow down. According to the survey map, the final monument should have been less than 300 meters away. We walked almost twice that distance before either of us spoke. I remember checking the GPS more than once, convinced we'd missed a turn somewhere. Everything insisted we were heading in the right direction. It just didn't feel like we were getting any closer. Eventually, the trees began to thin. Not gradually, almost all at once. The forest opened into a small clearing, no bigger than a suburban backyard. The ground was strangely bare. No ferns, no thick scrub, just old leaves lying across hard-packed earth. It was the first place we'd seen all day where sunlight reached the ground. Mark stopped walking. He didn't look surprised. He just looked disappointed, as though he'd hoped this place no longer existed. Without saying a word, he nodded toward the center of the clearing. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then I noticed it. A granite survey monument, about waist high, standing perfectly upright. It looked newer than every other marker we'd found that week. The edges were sharp. The surface was almost clean. It didn't belong there. I walked over and brushed away a handful of leaves. There was no survey stamp, no government markings, nothing that identified who had placed it there. Just 3 straight lines carved into the top. They met in the center like the points of a compass. I'd never seen that symbol before. I asked Mark if he recognized it. He took his time before answering. Then he quietly admitted he did. He'd seen it once before, on this same mountain, more than 20 years earlier. His old supervisor had told him to leave immediately. No explanation, no report. Just pack up and go. Mark said they never spoke about it again. I laughed. Not because I thought it was funny, because it was the only thing that made sense to do. The whole story sounded ridiculous. A forgotten survey marker, an old symbol, a supervisor who refused to explain himself. There had to be a logical answer, so I did what I'd been trained to do. I set up the equipment. If the monument was real, the measurements would prove it. The total station locked onto the prism almost instantly. I checked the level, confirmed the coordinates. Then I took the reading. The distance appeared on the screen. I looked at it once. Then again. I checked every setting before taking the measurement a second time. The result didn't change. According to my equipment, the monument wasn't standing in the clearing. It was almost 93 meters beneath it. I checked everything again. The batteries, the calibration, the prism. Nothing was wrong. I looked at Mark. He wasn't looking at the instrument. He was looking at the trees surrounding the clearing. Very quietly, he said, "Pack it up." This time, I didn't argue. I packed the equipment without taking my eyes off the monument. Every instinct I had told me to take another measurement, to prove the instrument was wrong, to prove there was still a logical explanation. Instead, I followed Mark back through the trees. Neither of us spoke until we reached the truck. The drive back to town was almost silent. That night, I copied every measurement into my field notebook. Then I entered the same figures into my laptop. I checked them twice before going to bed. I didn't want to rely on memory. I wanted evidence. The next morning, we drove back to the office. I opened the survey files, compared my notes with the digital records, and immediately felt my stomach drop. The impossible measurements were gone. Every distance now matched the original survey from almost a century earlier. Exactly. Down to the centimeter. I opened my notebook. Those numbers had changed, too. The figures I'd written in the field were no longer there. In their place were the correct measurements, as though the impossible readings had never existed. I checked every photo we'd taken on the mountain. The clearing was there. The trees were there. But the granite monument had disappeared. There wasn't even disturbed soil where it had been standing. Nothing. Every piece of evidence agreed with the new measurements. Everything except my memory. For days I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe exhaustion had got the better of me. Maybe I'd made a mistake and refused to admit it. It wasn't a satisfying explanation, but it was the only one I had. 3 days later, I was unpacking my backpack before another job. At the bottom of one of the side pockets, I found a small piece of granite, about the size of a golf ball. One side had been cut perfectly flat. Carved into the surface were 3 straight lines meeting in the center. The same symbol. I don't remember picking it up. I don't remember putting it in my bag. I still have it. It's locked in a drawer at home. Every now and then I think about throwing it away. I never do. 6 months after that job, Mark retired. Neither of us ever mentioned the mountain again. Not because we'd agreed to keep quiet, because there wasn't anything left to say. I still work as a surveyor. I still trust my equipment. I still trust mathematics. Most days. But every now and then I'll find an old strip of orange survey ribbon tied around a tree where I know there wasn't one before. I don't stop to investigate anymore. I just keep walking. Some things aren't meant to be measured, and some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. If that story really happened, I don't think the mountain was haunted. I think it was protecting something. Whatever stood beneath that clearing had been hidden long before either of us were born. And I can't help wondering whether the marker was ever meant to keep people out or keep something else in. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Coal After Dark. It really helps the channel, and I'd love to have you back for the next one. If you've ever experienced something you still can't explain, leave a comment below or send it through the email in the description. Your story might feature in a future episode. Until next time, sleep well. And if you ever find yourself following an old property line through the mountains, keep your eyes on the markers. Good night.